Hi everyone, my name is Amira El-Gawly. I am the founder and CEO of Manifesta, a workplace culture agency here in Washington, DC. I am tuning in from DuPont Circle, and I would love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop it in the chat, introduce yourself, tell us your name, where you're calling in from. Are you in the DMV? Are you in another state? Let us know. We'd love to know who you are and where you are. I am going to share my screen in a moment so I can introduce this incredible panel. All right, can you see my screen? Super, okay. So this is the inaugural culture track that you all are joining. We are on session number, I think, 5. It's been an amazing week, so thank you for being with us and joining us today. For those of you who aren't familiar with DC Startup Week is a 5-day conference that's focused on building the startup and entrepreneurial community here in the DMV area. We want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Next, Insperity, WIS, and Technology Rivers. If you have any questions throughout the talk, and I imagine you will have lots of questions, please put in all caps in the chat, question, write the word question, and then followed by your question. I'm sure the chat is going to be super dynamic, so we don't want your questions to get lost. I will be helping Emily, who is our moderator, keep track of those questions and feed those to her at the end. If you want to share on social the amazing things and gems you're going to hear dropped out of these speakers' mouths, please tag DC Startup Week, tag Manifesta at Manifesta Co. Use the hashtags here. And for those of you who are note takers and you want a place to keep all your notes, we have created a guide for you where you can take digital notes and see the whole program and learn more about the speakers at the link right here, manifesta.co/startupweek. That being said, I'm going to jump right into introducing our amazing panel. So I get to introduce a dear friend and amazing woman, leader, business owner, Emily Goodson, who is going to be leading this session, Workplace Superheroes, Great Managers Are Your Secret Weapon to Loyal, Engaged Employees. This is a topic that I am super passionate about, that I care deeply about, and I have seen proven time and time again. And Emily has put together a really amazing group of people who are great managers and great leaders in their organizations. So a little bit about Emily. Emily is the founder and CEO of CultureSmart, a consultancy that helps early stage startups scale smart and save money. Prior to founding CultureSmart, Emily led and scaled the talent and people functions for Uptoro here in DC and Morning Consult, 2 venture-backed startups in our area. Chelsea, who has this like beautiful background. I don't know where you are, Chelsea, but I want to be there. Chelsea is the Senior Director of Enterprise Business Development at FiscalNote, a company that aggregates legislative and regulatory information from around the world and helps organizations act on potential risks or opportunities. Chelsea has helped build and scale multiple sales teams as they look to grow from early stage to mid stage and beyond. Chelsea and I have never met in person, but we have been fangirls, I guess, like online for a while. No, that's not true. We did meet in person. What am I saying? That's right. We have met once in person. Actually, Chelsea's been in my home, so I totally just lied. Jess is the CTO at Axios and was previously the CTO at Uptoro. She has grown teams from handfuls to hundreds and revenues to $100 million plus. She helps to organize a number of DC area meetups and is the creator of the DC Tech Slack channel, which she linked, I believe, in Attendify. So if you're interested, go in the Attendify feed and join that Slack community. It sounds amazing. I think I'll be joining it too. Johnny, last but definitely not least, is the CTO at Till, a company helping renters pay, stay, and thrive in their homes. I love that, Johnny. Johnny has built and led engineering teams for several DC tech startups, including Mapbox and iStrategy Labs. He's also a member of the board of directors for Bite Back, an amazing organization that is creating a pathway of inclusive tech training that leads to living wage careers. So, whew, mouthfuls, incredible people. Can't wait to learn from you. That being said, I am going to turn it over to you, Emily. Welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Amira. It is just such a joy to be with this panel, and I'm seeing so many familiar faces on the chat and in the participant list, so glad that everyone could join us. So this session is going to be about our people managers, right? Our workplace superheroes. And I truly believe that people managers are workplace superheroes. And we're going to chat about, what does that mean? What are the different superpowers that managers possess? Specifically, our three esteemed panelists are going to get into the different superpowers that they have exhibited. And then we're going to talk about, how do you train for that? So how do you build that within your startup itself? So I'm going to go through a short deck, probably about 8 minutes, just to set the foundation for the panel. And then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. So as Amira said, I am the founder and CEO of CultureSmart. After scaling a couple people departments, I really wanted to make an impact on early stage companies. And so I'm a people and culture consultant, typically for startups under 50 employees, but I do help some larger startups build people manager training programs. So with that, I'm going to share a short deck. And let's just see, Jess or Johnny, if y'all could just give me a thumbs up that you can see this. Love it. Jess is my girl with the thumbs up. She's always right on it. All right, so workplace superheroes. So why are we talking about managers? The reason we're talking about people managers is because people managers account for 70% variance in employee engagement scores. Now, what does this mean? I think employee engagement is one of those terms that we hear all the time, but don't always have a working definition for. And I define employee engagement as an employee's emotional connection to an organization. Are they motivated to work there? Are they proud to work there? Are they happy? Are they putting in their best effort? No, those are all kind of positive attributes of employee engagement. And obviously we can have the flip. But what we really see time and time again, and I'm sure those of you who've done your own employee engagement surveys see this, is there can be a ton of variance between somebody's experience on team A and team B. And that really comes down to who's leading the team. So one of the concepts related to this that I really like is this idea of leverage. And I started to think about this concept after I read Andy Grove's book, High Output Management. And I see a lot of shaking heads. It's a great book. Andy Grove was the CEO of Intel. And this book, Amira is going to send out some resources after the panel, and this will be linked. But the idea is that managers can make a small investment and it could have a huge return. Conversely, if we take performance reviews, for example, you could choose not to do them, and that's going to have an exponential negative effect. And so, a couple takeaways here. When I'm talking to leaders about their training budgets, typically in startups, we all have small training budgets, and that's just the reality. But what I tell people is always spend a good chunk of it on people managers, because the impact and the return on investment is huge. As a startup scales, a head of people, a co-founder, a CEO, it's just not physically possible for them to have the positive impact they want to have on every single employee. But it's not possible for them personally to have that impact, but it is possible for them to have that impact through their people managers. So that's the importance of training. That's why we're talking about people managers, because of the influence they have. So what is the link between superheroes and people managers? So if you think about, you can think about the cinema, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Captain America, Wonder Woman, pick your favorite. You can also think about our real life superheroes, you know, our first responders, even our teachers right now, you know, people who possess these extraordinary abilities and skills that are unique to them, and they're using them to really make the world a better place. Now, a lot of times that requires some training, right? It requires training. It might require a mentor. You have to put the work in. You know, you see this in the movies all the time, and the same is true for people managers. You know, a lot of times one of the challenges I find is that in startups, people get promoted to the role of a people manager and haven't had the training or haven't had the experience before. That's very common, and that's okay. But as, you know, the leader of a startup, or as the head of people, or even as the head of a department, what can you do to give the people the training they need to be a superhero and to use their superpowers? So one of the first questions we're going to ask the panel is, what are your superpowers, right? And I really equate that to your strengths. You know, we don't all have the same superpowers. We don't all have the same strengths. And what we're really trying to get at here is, how can you use those unique, extraordinary abilities you have to really make an impact on your team as a people manager? So let's look really briefly at some of the research on superpowers, and then I'm going to open it up to the panel. All right, so superpowers according to the research. So 2 studies I want to highlight here, one from Google, one from Gallup. And these are both going to be linked in your resources too. So on the left, some of you may be familiar with this, but Google started Project Oxygen back in 2008. And I believe at that time they identified, I think, 7 behaviors. They now have 10. They redid this in 2018. But this is their research study on, you know, who are our high performing managers at Google and what behaviors do they demonstrate. And I don't think, to be honest, a lot of these were surprising to Google. They may not be surprising to you. Good coach empowers the team, has key technical skills or content skills. So if you're leading a sales team, you want to be knowledgeable in sales. But you know, what I like about this is, I think sometimes we think in order to be a superhero, we have to have something so unique to us that nobody else has it, right? That's not true at all. I think sometimes you can be a superhero to your team by just being a good communicator. And particularly right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, good communication, and I know Jess and our panelists are going to talk about this, is it's everything. You know, how you communicate and what mediums you're communicating and what context you're communicating. So just food for thought. Salesforce, Netflix also have some great examples of top manager behaviors at their organizations, if you want to look it up. And then just on the right here, I want to highlight Gallup. So they have an article that will send out 8 habits of best managers from 2019 that digs in a little bit more to some of these behaviors. So one that I really like is, they say a superpower is being able to connect company purpose or those high level business goals to your team's goals and to an individual's goals. That's huge. Highlights the opinions of others. Again, we see the coaching, and then we see meaningful one-on-one conversations, which I think is a beautiful example of this idea of leverage that we started with, right? It's, do I really have to have this one-on-one conversation? Do I really have to take the time? Yes, you do as a people manager, because it makes a huge difference. And it's 30 minutes of your time, but you're giving your direct report the answers they need that are going to set them up for the next week or 2. So just food for thought there. We are going to turn it over to the panel. So we're going to talk about superpowers, the emerging superpowers we're seeing due to COVID-19, how to train on those. And as Amira said, if you have questions, we're going to try and leave time. We're doing great on time, so we're going to try and leave time for questions at the end. Just pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to them once we wrap up. So having said that, stop sharing that. So our first question for the panel is about superpowers. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists what their superpower is, how they've demonstrated it, and why it's allowed them to be successful. So we, for each of these questions, are going to start with one person. Then everyone's going to chime in. If we talk over each other a bit, you're going to have to just excuse us. It's part of the Zoom experience. But with that, Jess, why don't I start with you on this first one? You're an incredible leader, and we'd love to hear sort of what your superpower is and what you've demonstrated over your career.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And hello to everybody. I'm happy to be here. I think it's interesting, there's a lot of things that I think come to the table of being an effective leader, but one that I want to highlight right now is something that I've gotten feedback on during this pandemic. I've always been a technologist and I've always been sort of internet native, but people have given me feedback that I'm really great at connecting with folks over Zoom. And I think that's actually made a big difference with people. Like, I've definitely worked with a lot of leaders who I think really disengage when it comes to the computer. Like, if you're not physically there with them, it's like you don't exist, or it's very hard to like create an emotional or like empathetic connection. And I think that's really critical with anyone you're leading, to have that sort of rapport with them. And I think that, I don't know, the way I've been thinking a lot about this, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize I did that. So like, what am I doing? And I've been thinking like, I don't know, I had some theater training. I do improv on the side sometimes. And I think that like just big expressions make a big difference. But also, I was thinking about, I've been a public speaker sometimes in the past, and I was learning as a public speaker, like you always want to look for your nodder. So I always want to like find my, like either be the nodder or like find my nodder in the audience. So that helps me connect with people too. So I don't know, that's what's been on my mind lately, that kind of connection.
Yeah, I love that, Jess. Just to hit on two things really quickly that you said, one of the things that I think helps sort of augment that superpower is using context statements over Zoom or in email, right? Because sometimes your direct reports can't understand what, emotion you have if they're not seeing your face. And so one of the things that I encourage people managers to do is say, I'm writing you this email from a place of pride, or I'm sharing this update with you because I'm so happy. That I think, to kind of go off of what you're saying, Jess, is another good way to kind of further that. Yeah. Why don't we turn it over, Johnny, why don't I turn it over to you to share your superpower next?
Sure. I think that for me, being able to identify and leverage people's strengths have been really crucial for me throughout my career. The fact is, everyone's good at something. And so being able to hone in on what those specific skill sets are and finding a way to make them useful for the organization and for the rest of the team is very crucial to a manager's job. You could make the difference between taking someone who is underperforming and like make them an overachiever just by pointing them in the right direction and giving them the right thing to work on. And this comes really in handy when you're talking about inheriting existing teams. Hiring itself is really hard, but in a lot of ways, it's easier to build a team from scratch simply because you're there from the beginning. You have all the say about who you want on your team. But when you inherit a team, it's a situation where, well, I know these people were hired for a reason. I need to figure out why. And sometimes what they tell you isn't always the actual reason. For whatever reason, communication breakdown or people's perception about what they're good at is not actually, the case. And so just being a good listener and being able to identify people's strengths has been like really crucial for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight, Johnny. Thank you. I love the idea of listening, and you're spot on with it can be a superpower in and of itself to take over a team and sort of manage it to success. There are definitely unique challenges there. So thank you. Chelsea, what are your superpowers that you've demonstrated over the past couple of years as a sales leader?
Yeah, and hi everyone, it's nice to see you all. So like Jess, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's, my first answer was like, well, I really care about the people that I manage, like personally and professionally. And I feel like most managers would say that. So I tried to think, okay, like a level deeper than that. What does that mean to me? And I think what that means to me is that I want everyone to do their best and like reach that point that they feel really proud of. And I think one way to do that is by making sure you're really holding people accountable. And so how do I do that? In times of COVID and also before that, I think if you think about tying that to a superpower, almost obnoxiously so, I have like a really strong attention to detail. And I think that's very important, especially in sales when things can slip through the cracks, especially when you're going a mile a minute trying to like close things out at the end of a quarter or the end of a month or the end of the year. And I've done the job myself, so I feel like I can see the things that slip. And I think that allows my team members and my peers to be successful. Because there's kind of like a mutual trust there when I say, hey, it looks like something might have slipped on this.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for sharing. I think that's a great transition sort of into our second topic area, which is specific to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has presented so many challenges to people managers and to all of us, honestly. But if you remember from my slide, one of the things about superheroes is a lot of times they're unsung heroes. And I really think the same is true for people managers. And particularly right now during the pandemic, people managers are having to juggle so much personally, professionally, families, partners, employees. And Chelsea, to your point, I know you and Johnny and Jess are very empathetic and caring leaders. And sometimes that can be, that in and of itself is a superpower in my mind in this pandemic, just given how much we're all going through. So having said that, Johnny, I want to toss it back to you. What other superpowers are you seeing emerge because of the pandemic, either personally at Till, in general in DC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously you hit the big one, which is empathy. But I think other than that, you have to really be creative these days. A lot of people, unfortunately, were found themselves unemployed during this time, or trying to gain other employment. But even for those of us who continue to be employed, that's a huge blessing and everything, but it's still really hard, right? For instance, school just started. Till has a lot of parents working there, and so figuring out how people can, facilitate school for their kindergarten and actually still be able to contribute to the team is it's really difficult. And so you have to really level set with your team and also your management to make sure that everyone is on the same page about how do we move forward, right? How do we get creative with working hours, and what can we expect from this person during this time, and really making sure the entire team is aligned, because this hits everyone completely differently. We get on Zoom or whatever in the morning, and I try to imagine what's going on in everyone's background, right? Because off to the corner, it's, a small kid at the table with headphones on trying to do math, or, it's a sick relative or something like that. And you never know what's really weighing on people. And, none of us are ourselves right now. Everyone's under like a constant level of stress. And so taking that with you to the workplace and figuring out ways to help people be productive, but also letting them know it's okay to not be okay, and we understand, is really, really important. And, we do what we can. I don't have all the answers. I've never experienced this in my career. But, it's something that I think about a lot and definitely weighs on me.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so spot on. Jess, Chelsea, do y'all want to chime in?
Yeah, I think, sorry, Chelsea. I think it's just to, like, when Johnny Ray, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about, I do one-on-ones with everybody in my whole organization regularly. I did it up to, like, when I was leading 100 people, I would still do one-on-ones at least once a quarter. And sorry, chairs here. And I think that there's a really important thing to do just to create that space, that open and listening space. I've been in therapy a lot. I'm trying to destigmatize that. Therapy's good. You should try it. But I think what a lot of really great therapists do is that they just kind of leave space for whatever comes up. And I think that in business, we so often get so focused on deadlines and delivery. And when we're over virtual, connections like this, we don't get the chance to have that sort of unintentional space. We have to create it intentionally. And I find that during those one-on-ones, it's really important for me to be quiet and to just sort of ask people how things are going, and then to just really very intentionally listen. And I think that builds an incredible trust and an incredible connection where people who are going through difficult times then start to feel more comfortable to share and to give you the opportunity, frankly, just to hold that together and to just acknowledge it and just live it, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, just therapy 100%. And also, I think being proactive is super important as well. I recently, had a couple of people onboard onto my team, and I was talking to them and getting feedback because onboarding in a remote setting is never easy and it's not ideal. And one thing that this individual said to me is that sometimes it could feel like they were on an island. They didn't have pre-existing relationships with people at the company. They were meeting people within the team, but had a hard time finding out outside of the team who they could connect with or engage with if they had questions. And so I think it's really important, not just with your own team or the people that you're managing, but, new hires across the organization, or, people who've been more tenured there, but being proactive and reaching out, even if it's over Slack or GChat or whatever method of communication you guys use within your organizations, and just saying hi, and just to your point, being there, because you don't know what they're going through, but it's easy to get caught up in your own stuff. As somebody said the other day, they don't know if they're working from home or they're living at the office, for a lot of us, I think. And so just taking a moment to reset and have that coffee break with somebody over Hangouts, I think is really important right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Big shout out to the donut bot in Slack. If you're using that, I think it makes it incredible. I've turned it up. It's so important.
Awesome. Yeah, and if y'all aren't familiar, so what Jess is mentioning is a company called Donut, DONUT, out of New York. They're fantastic. I've used them in, I think, every company I've worked at, but they will randomly pair people together for coffee buddies and coffee chats. And so it's helpful in taking out some of the awkwardness, right? Of, oh, I'm a new hire, I don't know you, but I want to get to know you. If it randomly pairs you, it takes away some of that awkwardness. So that's a great resource, Jess. One other resource I wanted to highlight, going off of sort of, what all three of our panelists have highlighted, is empathy. And, we're all describing sort of different behaviors of empathy, listening, creating space. And there's an excellent book that some of you have heard me talk about called Applied Empathy by Michael Ventura. It came out, I think, last year. It's truly outstanding. I highly recommend. I've actually framed manager training around it. It outlines 7 archetypes of empathy. So it basically describes what are the behaviors of empathy. Highly recommend it. We don't have time to get into it, but look it up, because it's a great it's a great tool for training. So having said that, we're actually transitioning to training as sort of our last panel topic, so it's perfect. And one of the things that I've done, if you all think back to the slides at the beginning, is I've worked with clients to use those 10 behaviors that Google outlines to kind of structure training. So if you're trying to build manager training in-house, you don't know where to start, you don't know how to start, take those 10 behaviors, use that as your outline. Or take Netflix's, take Salesforce. There are a lot of good examples you can use. And Google in and of itself has an awesome website called Rework, with a lot of manager training materials on it if you need them. So having said that, I want to turn it back to Chelsea, because she's got some real expertise in sort of training people managers and scaling sales teams and how you train people to do that. So Chelsea, back to you.
Sorry, unmuting difficulties. Yeah, I mean, I think when we were first talking about this, you know, Emily was asking how did I learn to be an efficient manager, right? Or like what skills are needed? And I think that I've been really lucky in my career because I've had the opportunity to work for some really great managers that I've kind of tried to emulate as I've stepped into more of their shoes. And you know, some of those characteristics that I really value are like being a good listener, right? Understanding the motivations of a team member, setting the bar high, and like not being afraid to hold your team members to those standards, and you know, making sure that like you can leverage other people if you don't have the expertise. So you know, I try to, it's hard to train on those specific things. I think the best way to do it is to really do it. But I think what the best way to you know, set people up for success within like the startup environment or as a new manager is to put people in positions where they can grow into management, right? They're not necessarily being asked to do things that are outside of their skill set at that moment. But you know, if you're trying to cultivate managers internally, you can set up a handful of player coach roles. And we're doing that at FiscalNote right now. And, you know, what that really does is it affords my team members the ability to, you know, start taking on managerial skills without, you know, diving head first. It lets them build upon their skills and really figure out if it's right for them. I think that, I mean, one thing that I've experienced, and I would imagine those of you who've worked at startups might also have experienced, is like, you always felt like you were just a little too late, right? Like I was just 1 month too late, and I would have gotten that like manager job or that director job. Like the person who started right before me, like I have the same skills as them, but it was like a timing thing. And I think we've at FiscalNote have been trying to put people in the positions to succeed no matter when they've started, you know, at an organization. So I really recommend kind of the player coach scenario. And also we've set up a community to help kind of new managers get started, which fosters kind of like a virtuous organization. You know, it creates this kind of like cyclical, like I'm going to help you and you're going to help me. And it's no longer like I'm just taking on this role and going with it. So I think those are some great ways of getting started.
Yeah, love that. Johnny, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was really great. I think for me personally, I would look at first starting with identifying, helping people become good leaders. Because in order to be a good manager, you need to be a good leader, but you don't necessarily need to be a manager in order to be a good leader. And so starting there, that's kind of where I started in my career. I didn't know I was like prepping for management. My actual first management job was very haphazard. It was very much the classic, you are the most senior person on the engineering team. Here's a manager job. And actually turned it down initially. But then I thought about it and actually, you know, ran with the role. And so training officially actually came much later after that. And it was very much retroactively. But the things that allowed me to be successful in that interim was connected a lot to the leadership training that I had early on, although management was just not a thing that I saw in my path at the time. So I think that's going to be really important to setting sort of like the foundation for, you know, how do you show up in a room full of people, or in this case on a call full of people? You know, how do you make sure that you are doing more listening than talking, and all these things that are just really good foundational leadership skills that may or may not transition to a management career, depending on what your preferences are.
Yeah, I love that. Jess, what are your thoughts on training people to be superheroes?
Yeah, I've been very lucky to receive a lot of sort of random management training ever since, 2003. And I think it's made a big difference in my ability to be successful. So I try to make sure that I provide opportunities for people. I think a really interesting thing that I focus on a lot with newer managers is you don't have to have all the answers. Like startups are about experimentation, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's true for leadership too. And I think it feels terrifying when you've got like people's careers effectively that you're responsible for. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to be humble about it and to, you know, be honest. But like, I think that's really big part of the foundation of trust. Like if you build this expectation with someone that I'm going to do my best and I would love your feedback to me about how I'm doing, and I can tailor this to fit you better if you can give me feedback and we can have a growth experience together. I think that makes a huge, huge difference along like coaching people along being leaders. Also, like I was very lucky to receive the training that Emily provided at Optoro. I thought that was really fantastic. So just a bit of a shout out to that too.
Oh, thank you. Well, manager training is honestly my favorite thing. If I could do it all day, I would. And just, you know, a few other notes on that, and then we'll pivot to kind of Q&A is, you know, like Jess was saying, I've built several in-house manager training courses. Happy to chat with anyone offline who's working to do that. You know, that doesn't have to be the only solution, right? Chelsea brought up a great point of mentoring between experienced managers and newer managers. I know a lot of startups locally do book clubs for managers, you know, where we read Crucial Conversations or one of the books from Gallup. Two other thoughts just to highlight before we go to Q&A. And while I'm wrapping this up, if you have questions for the panelists or for me, feel free to pop them in the chat. Amira's keeping an eye out for us. But two other thoughts are, Jess brought up improv at the very beginning of our talk here. Improv training is fantastic for managers, but also for employees. It's a great team building activity, you know, because it's putting you in this frame of mind of play and, you know, can take you out of this sort of, you know, we got to get this done. It's also something that can be done virtually. So if you're looking for, if your workplace is continuing to be remote, improv could be something great to look into, both for managers and for the entire company. The other kind of training piece I want to highlight that I've seen really help more experienced managers is 360-degree feedback. And so, you know, you can do a formal assessment through Center for Creative Leadership, through Culture Amp. You know, I don't recommend that for someone who's a brand new manager, but for somebody who's more experienced and is looking to really fine tune their competencies, that's a great thing to look into. So with that, I mean, let's turn it over to Q&A for about 10 minutes, if that works, Amira.
Absolutely. So I've been monitoring the chat, which has been super active. Everyone's in love with Johnny's setup. Go, Johnny. All right, so I haven't seen any questions come through just yet. So please, I want to encourage you all to drop questions in the chat. I have a question. So, okay, one just came in, but since I said I have a question, I want to get my question answered. So my question is this. So every organization, you know, we hope has at least one really great superhero manager, right? But lots of people get promoted into and hired into manager positions who don't have manager talent, right? Like the raw talent. And so that can often create friction inside an organization and put really great managers in a really awkward position. I have seen this a lot when I've worked in-house, that I would have people come and complain to me about their managers who maybe were like functionally really, really intelligent and like on it, but just couldn't wrap their heads around the people side and the development side of their work. And so I'm curious, from the perspective of all of you workplace superheroes, how do you as great managers support people who you don't directly manage, but need support? I'm curious what your take is on that.
I've definitely given people impact feedback. I think that's a really important skill to develop when you're thinking about influence, especially peer leadership. I think when you notice a behavior, finding time personally, one-on-one, and with a lot of empathy to share, I noticed this and I saw that it had this impact on these people, or at least I read this language, or I heard that this thing happened. Can I offer help or support, or like, I don't know. This is the tricky thing where I think it's depending on like building a solid relationship with your peers, which I think is a fantastic place to start no matter what. I think it's incredibly important. That's worked for me some. But
that's definitely helpful. Thanks, Jess. It can be awkward, you know, so it's like, it's a little bit of a tricky question, I know. Okay, so we have a couple more questions come in from Nikki. What is your biggest tip to ensure employees get the most out of their one-on-ones?
So Nikki, I sent some content on this to Amira that I know she'll be sending in follow-up, but I think the most important thing about one-on-ones is to remember that it's their time. Like, I think when I first started, I have a laundry list of stuff I want to talk to my team members about, but it's not necessarily my time to do that in their one-on-one. Like, this is their time to tell me how things are going, what I can help with. I also think it's important to separate a one-on-one, like a weekly one-on-one, from a more like long-term career pathing conversation, or like what somebody actually is looking to get out of their role. So having a cadence, whether for one-on-ones, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, and a more like quarterly basis for like career pathing conversations, I think is really important so the two don't get confused. I love Ben Horowitz's one-on-one guide. I know there are differing opinions on him and his style of writing, so take this with a grain of salt. But he asks more like high-level questions too in one-on-ones, like if the organization could improve in one way, like how would we do that? What's not fun about working here? Like, who in the company is like really kicking ass, and like why do you think that? I think it really helps to get a real pulse on how someone's feeling without, especially in sales, like I feel like people just walk through a pipeline, you know, and you want to kind of like remove yourself from that.
I also want to give a shout out to asking those kind of questions. I've recently adopted a 15-5 model to get like a weekly pulse on those kinds of things, and I think it's made a huge impact on just my visibility in the organization and that kind of thing. And I think it helps, especially my more introverted engineers, communicate more effectively when they get to write.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I'm a huge 15-5 advocate. If you haven't heard of it, it's a software tool, you know, certainly not the only one, but it sends out a pulse form every week or every month as you choose to your direct reports and ask them these questions. And to Chelsea's point, it helps keep the conversations intentional. So I've used it with my teams to actually track one-on-one items. It's just a marvelous tool for staying sort of organized and for helping people communicate.
Amazing. People are loving everything you are sharing. Super, super helpful and impactful. So another question from Sean. As managers, what have you utilized for team building exercises via Zoom, or, you know, however you do your virtual meetings?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Zoom, well, not just Zoom, any of the tools we use out here can be really difficult. It's hard to get that human connection. And, you know, we tried just a couple things. One of the bigger ones was just like hangout time. It's like not a meeting, just like a lobby to just talk about stuff. And it lasted for a little while. I think that I'm leaning towards a completely different direction. What I found to be helpful is making it okay for video to not be a thing. I'll go entire days just keeping my camera off so other people feel comfortable like not showing up, because a lot of time people just don't want to do it, and forcing them to do it just for the sake of let's build relationships is just, people are just not always in the mood for it, especially these days. So I found it effective not to push it, you know, make those opportunities available for people who want to, but also make it cool for people who just don't want to show up that day on camera. And that's a big stress reliever for a lot of people.
Anyone else want to jump in on that with any tips, including Emily? Okay.
Some of my teams have been playing Jackbox games over Zoom. It's like a little silly, like fun party games, and it actually goes over Zoom really well. So just a shout out to Jackbox.
I love that. I think I've played that before, actually.
I recently heard that the Escape Room was doing some really fun, like Zoom-oriented team building activities. I can't say one way or another how they are, but they look very fun.
That opportunity to play together, though, I think is just so important. It gets back to that idea of creating like unintentional space, like intentionally unintentional space. And that Hangouts idea, Johnny, that you mentioned, I think it's fantastic also.
Yeah, just to echo that, I mean, I think play is huge for creating psychological safety, right? Which is this sort of foundation to everything of it's okay to make a mistake. And just one other thing that I've seen is, I know we're hitting on video a lot, and I completely agree with Johnny that like there are times when we need to walk away and not force everyone to be on the video. But one more video suggestion is I've seen a company doing concerts over Zoom, meaning like if I know that Jess sings and plays the guitar, maybe she gets on and does a little mini concert for everyone. So just another thought.
I love that one, Emily. And one thing I thought of, like I run my company independently and I work with contractors, but one thing I thought of early on in the pandemic was like, I really wish like I had a team right now to do a talent show with. Like, I don't know if you all participated in talent shows when you were in school, but I did. Like I emceed them, I played the guitar, I sang, like you got to see these different parts of people that we just don't see anymore. And so I think we've seen we've started to see all the icky parts of people's lives, like all the things that stress them out, like a dog jumping. I mean, it's not really icky. Like I love seeing people's dogs and kids on the screen, but things that make them stress out. But like not always the things that make them shine, and the other roles and identities that we don't get to see. So I love the concert idea. Okay, we're going to maybe get through one, maybe two more questions. So Chelsea, your team is shouting you out, by the way. So from Danielle, hi Danielle, what specific approaches have you used to help your teams fight COVID fatigue? Excellent question. And keep morale high amid some very tough circumstances. Would love some more practical ideas here.
We've been hosting get ahead days. So once a month, like there are no internal meetings that are scheduled. This is meant to be like your time to get ahead, whether it's getting ahead on work and like emails or getting ahead on like grocery shopping or just like taking a few minutes for yourself. But it's throughout the company, just like calendars blocked, do kind of what you need. And I think that's been really helpful for people.
Yeah, we did a big calendar defrag actually early in the pandemic and made sure that every IC, like we just basically put all of our meetings between like 1 and 5 p.m. Eastern. And that made a huge help for a lot of folks. I think it made a big difference. Also, I think that for me, motivation gets back to impact and helping people like just stay connected to the impact. And I think it's easier to do when we've been able to come together. But in this time of like, when you feel like you can't make any impact on the world and you can't fix the world, like you want to do something. If you can channel that energy, like for us, like the impact is helping people understand what's going on and helping people connect to that and learn quickly what matters. Like that's huge and hugely motivating for everyone that comes to work at Axios. And so I think that's really important, just to always connect back, like Emily had it on that Google slide, like connect back what you're doing today to drive that impact every moment, even if it's like, I don't know, reconfigure a database somewhere. Why is that making an impact? Walk the steps through it and it makes a huge difference.
I love that, Jess. Totally agree. Just Johnny, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've been doing just like till holidays, just giving people time off. Like, hey, next week, don't sign on, time's off. And last month we did like the better part of a week. It's really helped a lot. Like people would just like DM me and say, thanks for the time off. I had an opportunity to recharge. It's like, well, it wasn't my idea, but you're welcome. So like, you know, just don't underestimate how much that means to people and how it can help them out in their day-to-day lives.
Time off is what we all need to restore, right? Because we don't just need rest, we need restoration. So I think that's amazing. Okay, there was one question that I've just, we're gonna take one more question. Oh, okay. Josh, this is an amazing question. All right, it's 2 questions, but it's really one. Okay, so how do you navigate the current world where everyone is functioning at less than 100%? I'm gonna actually answer this real quick. Josh, we've always been operating at less than 100%. Studies have shown that most employees have been operating at like 40 to 50% productivity. So we're like at way, way, way less than 100%. How do you reconcile business requirements and timelines with the fact that people may be less productive or consistent than usual? So that tension between expectations and reality.
We went through a performance review cycle recently, and we were very intentional about acknowledging that. I think during the performance evaluations, it was really important for us to have the conversation and say, look, like, we know that everyone's lives are like massively impacted right now. And so when we look at performance, we take into account that context, and we have conversations about what can we do to support you better? What can we do to give you the resources or the space or the empathy, frankly, just to acknowledge that. We also had to update our roadmap a bunch and just kind of reshuffle a lot of dates, put things out. I mean, it's just a reality.
Yeah. And I think looking at performance, not in like somebody's traditional day-to-day, like, I mean, on sales teams, right? It's not 100% of your goals. Like, how have you been onboarding and helping new people? How have you been like supporting your peers who are managing existing business? I think just like looking at ways that team members can support others outside of like traditional, line item tasks.
Beautiful. We have new metrics for success and performance and impact these days. And that's what I'm hearing you saying. All right, you have been incredible. I wish everyone could unmute themselves and just give you a massive round of applause, because you have taught us so much. I have learned so much from this session, and I do this work every day, so thank you. We are going to, this is probably like gonna be a really long recap because you all shared so many resources and so many insights. Thank you. I've dropped the link in the chat for those of you who are gonna wanna get that recap. Go download the guide and you'll be on the list to get the recap next week. We are going to do a very quick another outro to this session. So thank you to I think we had over 50 people in this session. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your engagement in the chat. Loved meeting you, loved hearing from you. Thank you to Emily for being a masterful facilitator and for the great presentation and great questions. Thank you to Chelsea, Johnny, and Jess. Thank you for being workplace superheroes. The world needs really great managers. You don't just change your workplace, you actually change your community, because every employee you touch their families, you touch their friends, you make their lives better. So that's why great managers are so, so important. So thank you. Coming up next, for those of you who are still with us, in less than an hour, I will be interviewing Susan Tynan, who is the founder of FrameBridge. She's like the DC startup community darling, an incredible leader who will be talking with me and with Zuhaira Scott Washington, who's a senior vice president at Expedia, former Uber, former founder, about the relationship between operations and how you run your business and workplace culture. And they're both going to be sharing some really amazing stories of failure, stories of success around leading, and their tips on how to manage and lead a team today and create and cultivate really great workplace culture. So please join us for that at 3 p.m. Tomorrow we have 2 great sessions. One is on remote work and how to lead a team and manage through remote work. And then that'll be followed by a really interesting session on both self-care and team care. How do we cultivate wellness and community? And like Jess said early on, normalize mental health, right? Like we really need to normalize talking about and the experience of being vulnerable and being compassionate to those around us, and the state of their mental health. So we'll have a session on that tomorrow, and we'll wrap the culture track up on Friday at 10 a.m. We hope you'll join us for those sessions. Thank you so much, Emily, Chelsea, Johnny, Jess. You rocked this so well. Thanks to everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Hopefully see you at 3 p.m.